Hey everyone, I'm really ready to get into this content. And to be honest with you, the topic that I really want to get into, or the question that I want to answer is, have you ever wondered how a general election could impact your job prospects? That is the main thing. So again, what I'm going to be focusing on is ways a general election can affect job availability, particularly for contractors and consultants. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content centered around this. So, who am I? Well, my name is Michael Tabaradi. I'm an independent management consultant and founder of the consultancy Mastery Group Limited. I started my journey probably about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, or whatever it may be. And I've just been sharing my experiences since, aligned to leadership, personal development, and management practices and career. So, all of that kind of stuff is what I really talk about. So, I've written here the slowdown in hiring. Cool. So, what does that actually mean? So, if we're looking at this, during the election periods, many organizations become hesitant to hire. And all that really means is that they haven't necessarily been given the green light to go ahead and make purchasing decisions. Because there have been some small talks, whether that's in government or ministers or whatever it may be, that actually there's a bit of uncertainty or something's happening. We can't say, but we're going to put a pause on this. So that's what ends up happening. Now, when it comes to this, what really ends up happening is that there is a certain level of, I guess, uncertainty when it comes to business planning. So think about it. These different public sector organizations, which affect, I would argue, even the private sector, are sort of in a position where they're unsure how to plan. They've been planning from, let's say, October up until March. But then, there are bubblings with some people from the top trickle down where there are conversations being said that actually, no, we're not going to be hiring, actually, and we need to put a pause. People may not know necessarily what that pause is, but they're put in a position where they can't fund certain projects or programs or whatever it may be. So after that, it's really sort of like a couple of weeks of a freeze. That's what ends up happening. The hiring process is frozen, and it means that they have to wait for a certain level of stability before anything is pushed forward. Cool. Okay. So then we move on to the role of government contracts. What does this really mean? And of course, government contracts could be broken down into so many different little things. So let's break this down. So, of course, there are different type of contracts. You have your public sector contracts. You have the standard contracts that are big procurements, such as providing services and all these different things there. But essentially, if we understand the UK particularly, it's all based on intellectual property and services. Okay, I think there was a study that was done that showed that the UK had a bit of a mini boom during the last, I think it was in June and July, I want to say. And so, with that in mind, that was heavily based on law firms, finance, low key, slightly tech as well, business management, all of that kind of stuff there. That's all contributed to the boom in the growth of this country. And so, if we step back and think about what procurement is the bidding and tendering of services. This includes human capital, i.e., consultants and contractors. And so, if that slowed down, that's meant that the UK has slowed down. That's pretty much what it means. And so, this really meant that there were many public sector organizations that were affected. And it also meant that actually, not only were public sector organizations affected, private sector organizations were affected. Because you think about it, private sector organizations apply for government bids or funding. Of course, the alternative is via investors and stuff. But if you think about it, these investors have confidence based on what the government's doing. So there's a knock on effect altogether. So, bearing this in mind, this is where there are uncertainties, job seekers, all of this stuff there. Now, what are some of the strategies to mitigate this sort of like impact? Well, what I would say to you is this affected me personally. Okay, so I was out of contract for about 5 odd months or whatever it may be. So what did I do? I made sure that I focused on speaking to the right people. Okay. I was speaking to recruiters and trying to understand what the situation was. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, what I was doing was I was working out, what is everyone saying? Is there a common thread? Okay. And the common thread was, obviously the general election has been sort of announced, which means that there is no government at the moment, which also means that there is a situation where hiring can't happen. That's essentially what was happening. And so that consistent message gave me an idea to just basically sit tight, because you have to remember, um, well, I say remember, but it depends whether you're affected. This all started to slow down from about, I would argue, beginning of April, okay? And this is when the market is usually thriving. The market is usually thriving around this time. And so, bearing that in mind, I had, obviously, when I ended my contract, the end of March up until, I think it was September or whatever it may be, of no contract being readily available. So I had to start thinking about that stuff, and I already knew what was happening. So I was like, okay, cool. Once the general election has been announced and everything else, and we know who has won effectively, then I know what to do. Okay. Then I know what to do. I'm just going to start applying, because there's probably going to be a flurry of people who are in my inbox. But you kind of have to be confident. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by this is, you need to be confident in your ability to essentially make sure that you can articulate your competence effectively. So essentially, this really means making sure that you actually work on your skills. Now, I'll probably do a separate video centered around how I was able to make sure I was confident in my competencies. Okay. But this is making sure, again, all the experience that you've had, you can articulate, because when the time comes, you need to be red hot on making sure that you are essentially presenting yourself in the right way. That's essentially what I'm talking about here in relation to this. Obviously, you can network with different people and stuff, etc., etc., etc. But for me, I was in that solitude mode. I was in that state of, yeah, we're gonna make sure that we get stuff done. Okay, we're gonna make sure that we improve things. So this is looking at your CV. This is looking at your portfolio. This is making sure that you are on different sort of like market sites and recruitment spaces and all of that kind of stuff there. This is making sure that your website is on point, etc., etc. You know, so again, for those who want to check out sort of my website, you can go to michaeltabaradi.com. You can check that out, or masterygroup.com, which is mastery with an I. So these are some of the things that you would start to think about during this time. So when it is difficult, okay, you need to say to yourself, okay, I want to make sure that I'm competent. I'm saying the same thing again and again and again, but I'm trying to labor the point. So if we think about post-election recovery, okay, what we're really saying is, once the dust settles, and this is what I was saying before, you want to bounce upon the opportunity. So what happened to me? I think the announcement was made on the Thursday. So of course there's not going to be much activity happening just in general. Just think about how people work, okay, and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, on the Monday, that's when I started to get calls. That is when I started to get calls. And with that in mind, it meant that because I was ready, preparing, doing my CV, doing the the portfolio stuff, my website, my LinkedIn, speaking to different people, X, Y, and Z, I was ready. Now, of course, I think I had about, I want to say I had about 4 opportunities lined up in the first week. I wasn't successful for all of them. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, another opportunity came for me, which was a consulting opportunity. And essentially, for those of you who don't really understand, consulting independently is really an outside IR35 contract. And of course, if you don't know what that is, you can check out my other videos to learn more about all of that stuff there. And so it really put me in a position where I was, yeah, ready to work, because obviously I hadn't done anything for 4.5, 5 months, etc., etc. And this had been presented to me. Now, of course, just in general, what I want to say is, if you're not getting people come to you, you need to make sure that you reach out to people. Be proactive. Okay, like how are people finding you? Like how are they doing all these things? Because if they're not able to find you, let's say you haven't put your up-to-date CV or supporting statement on CV Library as an example, or you haven't put it onto public sector resourcing, or you haven't made yourself available to certain peoples within your industry or markets, then you're kind of wasting your time. You need to be proactive. It's not pretty. I'm telling you. I always say, yeah, for anything to be beautiful, for anything to be a success, sometimes you need to ugly cry for months. And I'm not saying I was crying. This is an analogy, so to speak, you know? I'm saying ugly, that sort of crying. Like, it needs to be horrible before you can get to a point where actually you're reaping the rewards. So hopefully that gives you an idea and that makes sense. Now, the question I want to ask for you, and I'd love for you to comment below, is have you ever felt like an election slowed down your job search or career plans? How did you handle it? I'm asking this question because I think it's important for us to share our learning experiences and all that kind of stuff there. So, yeah, just make sure you comment below. Again, for anybody who's interested in really developing as a business leader or wanting to develop their portfolio career, let's say in contracting, then feel free to book a call. Any sort of services I offer, they're not free. Of course, the initial call is, but then we can talk more about how I can help you be more effective. So let's get into it. So, long-term career planning. What do I mean by this? So, essentially, you have to think to yourself, how can I stop this from happening again? This is what I was thinking to myself, at least anyway. So, I have a lot of different assets playing about. I've got money in the S&P 500. I've also got money in other sort of trades here and there. I've also got this YouTube channel, and it's interesting because even with this YouTube channel, I had a check waiting for me. I didn't even realize I had a check waiting for me, which is crazy. That has not happened because, yes, I took YouTube semi seriously, whatever it may be, but for the last 3 months, as you guys know, I have not been on this platform. So there's that. I've still had people message me in terms of wanting help with contracting or business development, wanting to get into either the independent consulting space or into the coaching space, as an example. So these things keep on coming my way. Now, of course, the majority of my bread is made from the consulting, okay? It's made from the consulting. However, there are other opportunities to win in those other spaces. And so you need to think to yourself, what are the things that you need to do to develop yourself? And whether you like this or not, the reality is you're going to have to build some sort of additional service centered maybe potentially around your brand, capitalizing on a pain or, again, a desire that you believe you can help people with. So you have to think long and hard about this. And I could potentially do a video centered around this to get you thinking about your portfolio career. And if you remember, I did an article centered around all of this stuff. There were 6 different archetypes of the type of portfolio career you may have in this given moment in time. So these are things to think about so that you can weather the storm, so to speak. And of course, bonus tip. Ooh, yeah, great. So essentially, with the bonus tip, what we're talking about here is making sure you stay informed, which is pretty sort of like self-explanatory. But you want to keep an eye on political developments. How do you do this? It's very, very simple. You need to be listening to the debates that, whether it's the Conservatives or the Labour Party are having against each other. You need to be listening to the budget statement. So the August statement is happening, I believe, at the end of October. It's happening at the end of October. So you want to be able to be in a position where you're listening to that and seeing how it relates to you. Sometimes you can check out places like the BBC or Sky or whatever it may be to get their summary. But of course, we know the news is the news. So it's best that you get it from source. Okay, that's the most important thing. It's also really good to make sure that you talk to different recruiters, okay, and other contractors and consultants within a space because they will have a view, okay? They will have an idea in terms of what comes to mind, so to speak, okay? The other thing I want to say in relation to this is You want to make sure that you use the economic forecast to make career decisions. So essentially, what I'm saying by this is, if you know there are changes to tax, or if you know there is going to be more investment in a certain area, let's say, Keir Starmer's talking about Great British Energy. Maybe there is an investment that you want to make in terms of understanding the energy sector more, okay? And maybe you want to understand what gaps there are on the market when it comes to your given niche. Maybe that's in business analysis or program management or whatever it may be. Whatever it is, there is an opportunity for you to capitalize and learn. So hopefully that gives you a clear idea in terms of how you need to be thinking about all of this stuff. Now, to summarize, okay, really and truly, what you need to remember is during elections, businesses often freeze. It is a given, okay, because they have no direction from the top. It's very hierarchical. So that's something that you need to remember. The second thing is it causes delays in government decisions, in contracts. Everything is halted. Everything. And so you have to use that opportunity to start thinking about how you can focus on other areas, how you can focus on being a more competent, more effective individual. And this is where you have to do the groundwork. Every single cycle has a season. So maybe during that season, that is a winter season, okay? Because once the general election is over, or any sort of political event for that matter, you want to be in a position where you're able to capitalize. Okay, that's exactly what you want to be able to do. So think about all of this stuff. You want to make sure that you also build a career that is adaptable by nature. So think about your personal brand. Think about what other things are showing signs of promise. Think about how you can solve a specific pain or really allow someone to have a certain desire. These are all things to think about. And then how can you commercialize this? How can you make it something that actually turns into something that is viable? It takes time. It's not quick. Give everything minimum at least 24 months. If you really put in the right sort of dedication and effort behind it. But these are all things to think about. So hopefully that's given you an idea behind what you need to be thinking about. And of course, we can always connect if you want to when it comes to, again, socials, or if you want a one-to-one or whatever it may be, you can check out the links below. But as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. And again, if you want to see anything centered around portfolio careers, consulting and contracting independently, leadership and personal development, then I'm your man. Anyway, take care, God bless, peace.